Built as the first electrically powered elevated railway in the world, beating out the Chicago L train by at least 2 years, the Liverpool Overhead Railway provided a vital cross-city link across the Mersey Docklands during a period when they accounted for among the largest shipping gateways between the UK and the colonies of the British Empire. Sadly, as Liverpool's role on the world stage began to diminish in the post-war era, the Overhead Railway soon lost its primary function to road transport, and in combination with the expense of repairing its heavily corroded and outdated infrastructure, by 1960 this pioneering system had been consigned to the history books. The first railways to appear at the Liverpool docks were originally laid in 1852, so as to provide a more efficient means of shipping goods to the harbour without having to face the notorious congestion of the city's ancient narrow streets, the early Liverpool dock railways being horse-drawn due to the significant number of flammable goods and materials that could have been ignited by steam locomotives. Aside from their freight operations, this also included a somewhat innovative road-rail passenger omnibus system from 1859, with horse-drawn carriages that would be converted rapidly from rail wheels to road wheels in order to overtake goods trains, and by 1880 operated at 5-minute frequencies, although in order to circumvent the problem of passenger services being held up by goods trains, proposals for an elevated railway had been mooted as early as 1852, but ultimately came to naught due to construction costs. In 1877, the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board proposed again the possibility of a single-track elevated railway with passing loops at stations, but this again was rejected due to the service being unlikely to meet the needs of the rapidly growing port, although continued lobbying by the port authorities eventually convinced the Board of Trade in 1882 that a line should be constructed. However, before any work could be carried out, the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board reviewed its policy towards transporting the public, and again the project was scrapped before any work had begun, a third and final proposal emerging in 1888, when a prominent group of businessmen formed the Liverpool Overhead Railway Company and obtained the Dock Board's powers by an act of transfer. The two leading engineers, Sir Douglas Fox and James Henry Greathead, were commissioned to design the railway, but were faced with the same problems that had befallen the original dock lines, in that steam traction could not be used due to the inflammable nature of many goods items being stored in the dock area. Against an early incentive to have the bridge deck be covered by thick floors so as to capture any errant sparks coming from steam locomotives, Sir William Forwood, chairman of the Liverpool Overhead Railway, turned to his own experience studying the emerging trend for electric-powered suburban railways that had been pioneered in the United States by the likes of the General Electric Company and their alternating current motor car, a precursor to the later streetcar. Forwood would declare in 1891 that the railway would be powered by electricity instead, thus making it the first of its kind in the world, with John William Willans, a renowned British mechanical and electrical engineer, being tasked with developing the new system that would propel the upcoming trains. Construction on the railway infrastructure itself had begun in 1889, and proposed an initial route that ran from Alexandra Dock to the north of the city centre to Herculaneum Dock in the south, although the route did extend for a further 800 metres north of Alexandra Dock to the Seaforth Sands carriage sidings, where stabling and maintenance of the trains took place. Construction of the overhead railway comprised a wrought iron girder structure that was elevated 16 feet above street level, with a total of 567 50-foot spans being erected, the railway trackwork itself being of a standard gauge and laid upon longitudinal timbers on the elevated sections, with 4 bridges being constructed to cross the wider streets of the inner city. At the same time, hydraulic lifting sections were provided at Brunswick, Sandon and Langton docks to allow oversized goods access to the harbour, with a later bridge at Stanley Dock, which was a combined lifting and swing bridge, being introduced so as to allow shipping access to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, with the lower lifting section carrying the road and goods railway. Similarly, the railway was not fully elevated along its entire course, as at Bramley Moor Dock, the railway dropped to road level in order to pass under the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway coal tip branch, and was accessed via a sharp gradient of 1 in 40 that was dubbed the switchback. For power, the system originally employed a conductor rail that was placed between the tracks, and was energised at 500 to 525 volts DC, the electrical supply being generated by a specially built coal-fired power station at Bramley Moor Dock that was served by its own dedicated siding from the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway's coal tip branch. Rolling stock would comprise lightweight passenger cars designed to incorporate a driving motor and 2 trailers, with the driving motor including a single powered bogie capable of 60 horsepower, the completed route, which was finalised in January 1893, coming to a total build-out cost of £510,000, or £51 million in 2025, and had used a total of 25,000 tonnes of iron and steel in its construction. The first full journey along the route took place on January 7, 1893, with the railway chairman, along with engineers and their families in attendance, followed by the official opening of the route on February 4th by leader of the opposition, the Marquess of Salisbury, who turned on the main electrical current during a ceremony at the generating station at the Bramley-Moore dock. The ceremony was attended by the Earl of Latham, Lord Kelvin, the Mayor of Liverpool, the chairman of the dock board, directors and engineers, and a number of other guests, who travelled on an inaugural journey along the railway, the Liverpool Overhead being the world's first electric elevated railway and the first to be protected by electric automatic signals. Upon its opening, the line comprised 13 stations including Alexandra Dock, Brocklebank Dock, Canada Dock, Sandon Dock, Clarence Dock, Prince's Dock, Pier Head, James Street, Customs House, later Canning, Wapping Dock, Brunswick Dock, Toxteth Dock, and finally Herculaneum Dock. However, it soon became apparent that due to the line being built primarily to serve work-based journeys between the individual docks, receipts outside working hours were poor and meant the line's profits were notably subdued, thus leading to the decision being made to extend the line to serve nearby residential areas, with a short extension to Seaforth Sands being opened on April 30th, 1894. This was followed by the most intensive extension of the route to Dingle on December 21st, 1896. This 1-mile addition to the southern end of the line, including the construction of a 200-foot lattice girder bridge across the Cheshire Line's goods yard, and the excavation of a half-mile-long tunnel through the sandstone high ground further inland, so as to serve an underground station beneath what is now the A561 Park Road. The original covered elevated station at Herculaneum Dock would be repurposed as a small 2-track depot for the storage of units outside the peak hours, and other stations to be added to the route included Nelson Dock and Huskinson Dock between Clarence Dock and Canada Dock during 1896, the latter replacing Sandon Dock, while Langton Dock existed briefly between 1896 and 1906 south of Alexandra Dock, and Gladstone Dock between Alexandra Dock and Seaforth Sands from 1930. By 1900, the railway's contractor, J.W. Willans, had been appointed as chief engineer, and due to his past experience in building and running electric railways, he introduced from 1902 a newer and more powerful electric motor system to the trains so as to reduce journey times and allow for competitive frequencies against the recently established Liverpool Corporation tramways of 1898, which, though routed more towards serving the suburban areas to the east of the city centre, ran routes within the dockside that were in direct rivalry with the overhead railway. From 1906, amid proposals by the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway to electrify their Liverpool, Crosby and Southport Railway from Liverpool Exchange to Southport, which also operated a third rail system, a new connection was built between the overhead railway and the Southport line at the pre-existing Seaforth station to the northeast of the current overhead railway terminus. This would become Seaforth and Litherland from July 1905, and allowed for through services to operate from Dingle in the south to Southport in the north, and Aintree on the Liverpool, Ormskirk and Preston Railway to connect with Aintree Racecourse. Although through trains from Dingle to Southport and Aintree were withdrawn from 1914, due to rising maintenance costs and a downturn in traffic caused by the start of World War I, these services being never reinstated, and thus seeing all trains terminate at Seaforth and Litherland. With the inclusion of the new traction motors, a through journey across the city from Dingle to Seaforth took approximately 22 minutes, although due to the increased power and maintenance costs, from 1908 the top speed was reduced and journey time slowed by 6 minutes along the core section of the overhead railway, the peak hour frequencies on the line being 1 train every 3 minutes from 1908, and by 1910 providing at least 1 train every 10 minutes between the hours of 4:45 a.m. and 11:33 p.m. on weekdays, a service pattern that put fledgling subway and metro systems in cities far larger and more significant than Liverpool to shame. Much of this was thanks to the replacement of semaphore signalling from 1921 by Westinghouse automatic train stop systems and permanent daytime colour light signalling, that were the first of their kind to ever be used in the United Kingdom, while at the same time, the railway was considered in and of itself a major tourist attraction, and even saw its own dedicated page within the Liverpool Guidebook of 1902 that recommended visitors to the city devote a part of their day to riding the elevated train. Tourist numbers on the route would become so great that from 1932, as shipping traffic in Liverpool began to dwindle following the Great Depression, a new tourist ticket was introduced that also included visits to ocean liners that were moored at the docks, as supported by reduced ticket prices and a major advertising campaign, this move keeping the line financially buoyant throughout the slump of the 1930s. Passenger numbers for the line peaked at 18 million passengers for the 1919 fiscal year, although even with the onset of World War II, the line maintained at least 14 million passengers per year during the devastation of the air raids that levelled large portions of the city, as well as surviving the catastrophic SS Malakand explosion at the Huskinson dock on May 4, 1941, which resulted in a blast so large that it levelled the surrounding harbour area and caused extensive damage to the overhead railway itself, although service was resumed within days of the event. The influence of the war also resulted in the cancellation of a proposed scheme to turn the overhead railway into a circular route through the extension of the line from Herculaneum Dock to St Michael's in the south, and from Seaforth Sands to Sefton Junction on the Aintree line in the north, taking over the former London and North Western line via Edge Lane and Wavertree to the east of the city, before connecting onto the Cheshire Line's committee route from Hunt's Cross. Ultimately, following the end of the war in 1945, the overhead railway continued to operate in the same general pattern, and was even able to avoid incorporation into the nationalised British Railways Company during 1948, as unlike many systems of its kind, the line was not an asset that belonged to one of the big four railway companies of the pre-war era, but was instead simply a local undertaking as controlled by the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board. Come 1950, with the increased use of cars and buses within the Liverpool area, passenger numbers dropped away to 9 million users per annum, and with the rolling stock now approaching half a century old, modernisation was required, which included the incorporation of sliding doors, the overhead railway continuing to maintain a largely competitive edge throughout the 1950s, as it maintained service for high levels of dockyard workers. However, while the equivalent street-running tram system saw massive reductions in its patronage, and by extension track mileage, before finally being closed in September 1957, the future prospects of the line were queered by a blanket lack of investment in the upkeep of railway infrastructure during World War II, a pervasive issue that had led to the collapse of the mainline railway network and ultimately to emergency nationalisation in 1948. The ironwork that formed the basis of the elevated viaducts was shown to have suffered greatly from corrosion, primarily caused by the steam-operated docks railway that ran beneath some sections of the route, and even with some of the dock railway's fleet of steam engines being fitted with specialised chimney cowls to deflect the steam from the structure, pronounced rust and corruption on the surface caused by steam and soot from the dock locomotives, in combination with rainwater that formed a potent acid mixture, led to a fatal degradation of the railway that would require extensive remediation work. Costed at approximately £2 million to repair following a survey conducted in 1955, or £41.7 million in 2025, a mixture of ever-decreasing passenger numbers since the 1929 Wall Street crash, combined with the stringent controls implemented by the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board over the operation of the line since its opening, which included the barring of its use as a convenient freight route for mainline railway operators such as the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, meant there was little incentive for the Liverpool City Council to justify spending such a large amount of money on refurbishment works. Attempts to sell the route to British Railways so as to allow for direct state funding were met with disinterest by the BR Board, due to their own losses being made on the implementation of elements related to the ultimately shambolic modernisation plan of that year, the only recourse being for the Liverpool Overhead Railway Company to declare voluntary liquidation, despite the fact that it was still maintaining an operational profit for its stakeholders, and was relieved of its statutory obligation to operate passenger services with the Liverpool Overhead Railway Act of 1956. Public protest as to retaining the overhead line would fall on deaf ears, and eventually led, on December 30th, 1956, to the full closure of the route, with the very last two scheduled trains being full to capacity as they passed over the streets of central Liverpool for the final time, making it the first electrified urban railway in the UK to close. Subsequent to the closure of the route, the infrastructure of the line, plus a maintenance staff of 100 workers, was retained in the hope that a new financial backer could be found who would repair the corroded viaducts and reopen the overhead railway, but when one failed to materialise, demolition of the former elevated track bed began on September 23, 1957, and after 6 months the entire route had disappeared with little to no trace of it ever existing, apart from a few subtle leftovers and one notable landmark. This landmark would be the former tunnel and underground station serving the southern terminus of Dingle, which was later repurposed for use as a mechanic's garage, and briefly re-entered the headlines when a portion of the tunnel roof collapsed at around 3 p.m. on July 24, 2012, leading to the evacuation of several houses and a number of cars being crushed. In terms of rolling stock, rebuilt first-class trailer car number 7 and unrebuilt third-class motor car number 3, together with a section of the original viaduct, have been preserved, the former at Hope Farm in Sellinge, and the latter in the main hall of the Museum of Liverpool. Today, the mass transit needs of Liverpool are largely provided through the Merseyrail network, which was formed in 1977 through the acquisition of several former suburban railways, which included the lines north to Southport, Ormskirk and Kirkby, south to Hunts Cross, and beneath the River Mersey to Birkenhead, New Brighton, West Kirkby, Chester and Ellesmere Port, as supported by the boring of new tunnels beneath the city streets to connect the northern and southern railways. However, proposals have been made to reintroduce an elevated train along the waterfront at Liverpool in the same vein as the overhead railway, including a 2019 concept to connect Dingle and Festival Gardens with Everton's new Bramley Moor Dock Stadium and 10 streets, although development of such a route would be done on a solely tourist basis rather than providing a viable public transport alternative. But this has not gone beyond a series of CGI renders as of 2025. In the end, the Liverpool Overhead Railway proved to be one of the greatest pioneers of modern rapid transit, in that it not only circumvented the problem of congested city streets through clever infrastructure, but incorporated into its design many innovative safety and operational features that were decades ahead of contemporaries in much larger and more significant cities, though a mixture of neglect and a lack of political will to save the line when the limits of its Victorian-era construction became notably evident, meant it is now often forgotten and largely swept away by new development. In spite of this, the Liverpool Overhead Railway's legacy lives on through its spiritual descendants across the globe, including the Chicago L and the D&B trains of New York's Brooklyn-Manhattan BMT Transit Corporation, which carry millions of passengers per year effortlessly across the bustling streets of their respective urban areas, working with the same safety and efficiency as the original Liverpool Overhead Railway.